Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our CAWASA webinar, Wednesday webinar. This is number 4 in our series for 2025. And we're happy to have with us this afternoon Mr. Rajesh Kandhai, who is a seasoned professional with 24 years of experience in occupational health, safety, and environment. He holds dual master's degrees, one in environmental management from the University of the West Indies and another in occupational safety and health from the University of Turin. He holds a certified safety professional. He's a certified safety professional, certified fire inspector, and certified lead risk manager. Additionally, he is licensed third-party auditor for ISO 45001, 14001, and 9001 standards. His extensive career includes significant contributions to the oil and gas industry and serving as an environmental inspector at the Environmental Management Authority, where he managed environmental investigations and emergency responses. For over a decade, Rajesh has been dedicated to educating future leaders, delivering environmental management training at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. He has led numerous environmental audits with Trinidad's energy sector and conducted environmental and compliance assessments across various industries, including offshore and onshore oil and gas operations, fuel storage depots, power generation facilities, sewer treatment facilities, and the food industry. He currently serves as the OHSE manager at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, a role he has held for the past 14 years. In addition, he's a senior assessor for the Safe to Work TNT program, which within Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector, where he performs a range of environmental safety certification audits for contractors. Over to you, Rajesh, and welcome to our webinar. I see it's pretty timely because this is to do with disaster management and all the safety measures that we need to observe. Incidentally, this afternoon, this week I've been over at CDEMA sessions. We're looking at the review of actions that were taken in the response after the passage of Hurricane Beryl and planning for this hurricane season. So that is quite timely. Welcome to our webinar.
Excellent. Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. While I'm sharing my screen, let me start off by saying, I see a lot of people in the room, many of whom I think I know some of these people, and all of whom have extensive knowledge in the industry. So I want to recognize the wealth of knowledge in the room, and by no means am I the expert on everything health and safety. And I hope that this session today provides the seed for some discussions and thought as to things to come. The session today I'm looking at, I really wanted to talk about some key three concepts. The impact of artificial intelligence, climate change on OSH, right? So, and I want to speak about that specifically within, the Wastewater Association framework. So one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that in 2024, the International Labour Organization, they will designate annually a theme for World Day for Safety and Health. And in 2024, the theme was climate change and its impact on worker health. They identified 6 key topics that they wanted to focus on. One related to heat stress, the other UV radiation, increased in extreme weather events, the increase in air pollution, increase in vector-borne diseases, and increase in exposure to chemicals. So as we go through the conversations today, I want you to keep this in mind and reflect on how these things relate to your industry, to your association, and what are the things that we can do to really manage these types of things. How these different topics are changing with time. You know, how does vector-borne diseases change with climate change, and how does that affect the work that you do in your industries? So those are things that I want us to think about, and we will chat in some detail on that. This year, the theme for World Day for Safety and Health actually relates to the impact of AI and digitization at work. So I wanted to merge the two. I don't think that climate change is a one-hit wonder, and it's something that we can speak about once. It's something that has to be central to all conversations that we have with respect to the work that we do and the future that we face. With respect to AI and digitization, the ILO focused on things like advanced robots, the impact of advanced robots at work, the impact of AI and machine learning, the impact and the advent of exoskeletons at work, the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, the Internet of Things, and virtual and augmented reality. So the question really is, how do these things relate to the work that you do, to your industry? That's the first question. The second one also relates to how can we use these tools and these advances to our benefit to protect worker health and safety while we provide the services that your utility offers to the population. So just just for a 1 minute, any comments, any initial thoughts that people may have on these things? Sometimes, in the Caribbean, we tend to wait and see what happens in the rest of the world, and then we adapt and copy or implement. Is there any advances that we think we know of right now that can be used in our industry? Okay, so people still logging in and settling down. I would leave that question. Anyone can comment later on. So I'm artificial intelligence, climate change, and OSH. Now, the thing about AI is that AI-driven technologies has the capability of processing an enormous amount of data. And by linking data, we can produce some innovative ideas that will allow us to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And for many organizations who will be facing issues with respect to extreme weather, water scarcity, which is an anticipated new risk for the future, poor air quality, land degradation, we can identify the risk factors early. We can develop our mitigation plans and speed up our action by predicting the cost of inaction and prioritizing accordingly. What does that mean? How can we identify the risk factors for water scarcity? Can we utilize AI to know in advance where we should be developing, where we should be focusing on? How can we be more effective in what we do? There's a lot of discussion about AI, and we have to really ask ourselves, can it be used, or is it something that we will not have control over? So before I go further, there is a lot of debate about climate change, and is climate change real? So, the question is it really getting hotter, or is it a matter of perception? So globally, 97% of scientists agree that global warming is significantly due to human activity. So there is consensus amongst the scientific community. Yet still, from a political point of view and an economic point of view, when we have these international conventions, there's a lot of debate and a lot of negotiating and compromises and to and fro as to what should be done. And that is because the efforts to mitigate the impact of climate change is one that requires all countries to participate in. Now, when we look at this, one of the things that came out of the Paris Climate Agreement was that globally efforts would be made to limit the average global temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius. Now, I want you to remember that 2 degrees Celsius, and what does that mean? And we were also aiming, scientists would have advised that we should achieve net zero emissions by the mid-century, by 2050. We need to implement systems to enhance our resilience and adapt to climate change. And we need to align our financial flows to objectives with respect to green energy, green building, and those types of things. So have we been able to limit our temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius? That's the first question. And the second question is, how do we, in your utility, your industry, how do you enhance your resilience of what you do and the service that you offer to the communities to adapt to climate change and mitigate the impact? And is this something that is a conversation in your networks? So currently at 2020, we were closing in on 1.5 degrees average temperature increase. The global consensus was 2 degrees is what we could realistically achieve. 1.5 is important because there's something called small island developing states. And the small island developing states actually went into all of these negotiations with the position that globally we needed to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, not 2 degrees, 1.5 to avert the effects of sea level rise. 1.5 meant that many small island developing states would be losing land and there would be environmental refugees. Large populations having to leave their homes because it's no longer habitable. And this is something that we are seeing globally already. NOAA has been tracking global temperature increases, and 2023, well, this may have been updated recently, but as of mid last year, 2023 was recorded as the warmest year on record. The 10 warmest years since 1850 all occurred within the last 10 years. That's something that is worth taking note of. We are seeing a rapid increase in our temperature, a rapid warming in the ocean currents. And this is something that should have all of us concerned. So, question I asked earlier, is it really getting hotter? And the question for that, the answer for that, sorry, is something that I want to use some specific data for a small island developing state, Trinidad and Tobago. Our Met Office has been tracking temperatures since the 1950s. And there are two graphics on the screen. The first one looks at the average daily maximum temperature per decade. And what we saw is up until 1980, the average temperature was below 31.3 degrees Celsius. From 1980 coming forward, we've seen the average daily temperature increasing. Now it's 32.2 degrees Celsius. So Trinidad and Tobago has experienced between 1951 to 2020 an average daily maximum temperature increase of 1.1 degrees Celsius. So within that 70-year period, we have seen a temperature increase. Now that by itself is interesting, but the second graphic is one that I find really interesting. The Met Office defines a hot day as any day in which the maximum temperature equals or exceeds 34 degrees Celsius. And what they did was they looked at per decade the number of hot days we experienced in Trinidad and Tobago. In That 10-year period between 1961 and 1970, there were 9 hot days. 1971 to 1980, there were 6 hot days. So in 20 years, we experienced 15 days where the temperature exceeded 34 degrees Celsius, equal or exceeded 34 degrees Celsius. That's less than 1 day per year. Then we started to see from 1980 and increased. 1980 to 1990, we saw 62 days. Now, if you were to go back to the graphic on the left, you would see that that decade, the temperature increased from 30.8 degrees to 31.3 degrees. And that corresponds also to the number of days in which the average temperature was at or above 34 degrees Celsius. And after that, it was an exponential climb. We went to 175 days, 385 days. So there has been a significant increase. So we went from less than 1 day per year to several days per year where the temperature exceeded 34 degrees Celsius. That is important because when you ask yourself as a leader in your industry, as a manager of team, a group of persons, or as a parent, what does this mean for your daily life? There are many people who would say there's a generational difference. And children these days, young people these days are so connected to their devices and they're so ruled by the internet and artificial intelligence and algorithms. And why don't they go outside? When I was young, I would be outside playing. As soon as I got home from school, I couldn't wait to finish my homework and run outdoors and play. Well, what we experienced temperature-wise and UV radiation exposure-wise was significantly different. What our current young people are experiencing would be different, would have health effects on them. What about our workers? Persons who have to be outside doing physical work at different times of day. How does this graphic affect work? How does this affect worker health? How does this affect our accident statistics? Is there a correlation between the number of accidents that we record at the workplace and temperature? Can heat stress affect someone's judgment and cause them to make poor decisions that results in accidents? And can we now utilize AI and leverage that to our advantage to avoid the effects of that? That's the conversation that we need to be having. So let's chat a little bit about heat stress. That's the first of the 6 topics that the ILO focused on. First thing is, do we know what is heat stress and the effects of heat stress? When we think about heat stress, there are 2 things that you have to think about. There's a term called heat stroke, and there's another one called heat exhaustion. And we need to recognize the symptoms of each. We need to be able to recognize it, and we need to train our staff to be able to recognize this. So the symptoms associated with heat exhaustion, relates to things like headaches, nausea and vomiting, feeling fatigued, thirsty. Interestingly, some things that you would not normally associate with heat stroke would be anxiety, poor coordination, weak or rapid pulse, sweating heavily, those types of things. When you think of heat stroke now, this is when it escalates a bit more. You have the headaches and the nausea and vomiting, but then you suffer from things like extreme thirst, dry and swollen tongue. The person may be disoriented, dizzy, or delirious. They may have slurred speech. They may result in showing signs of convulsions and seizures. So when you see these types of things, you need to be concerned. What do we have in place to manage this? What do we have in place to ensure that our workers in your utility, your industry, are properly hydrated and protected from the effects of heat? And that's something I don't know if it is properly managed. There's a tendency to think, well, you work in this industry and you have to be able to deal with it. But the point that I'm trying to make to you is that the environment is changing. The human body may not have been adapting fast enough to cope with these changes. So what are the changes that we are making in the workplace to manage this? So next topic deals with the effects of UV radiation. Now, UV radiation is something that, we tend to think in the tropics that we are not as prone to effects of UV radiation because this is a way of life, part of our life. But we are also susceptible to things like sunburn. The effects of UV radiation over time can result in eye damage, which is something that you don't see immediately, but it is a gradual degeneration in your sight, and you experience the effects as you age. Sometimes you may not, you may think it's the effect of aging, but it might be the effect of not controlling your UV exposures. It can have the effect of weakening your immunity and increasing the incidence of skin cancers. So let's talk about this. What can we do? Could the increase in the number of hot days affect your workers' health? Can it affect the worker health? Can it affect their performance and productivity? Can it affect your workplace accident statistics? And can it affect your insurance claims, the number of sick days, the number of visits to the doctor? And if your overall staff population are constantly making claims against your medical insurance, then at some point in time, your insurance provider is going to increase your premium. So there is a direct financial cost associated with that. There's a human impact associated with if your employees are operating heavy equipment and they develop signs and symptoms of heat stroke and they are delirious or exercising poor judgment, they may hurt themselves and others. Are we able to really be as productive in certain times of the day as we really need our workers to be? And how do we manage that? So have we, or should you incorporate in your work plan training for your workers for them to recognize the signs and symptoms of heat stress? Should we be modifying our working hours or work rotations? And culturally, if we were to tell our workers, you need to apply sunblock, how would that be received? All right. Those are some just things to think about and topics to discuss as we move forward. This session is not going to give you all of the answers, but hopefully at the end of it, it will stimulate conversation and cause you to go back to your different areas and, really try to make some improvements. And of course, what about the children? Think about what time of day we have our recess and lunchtime. And what do teachers say to the children? We want them to go outside and play, be physically active, use up your pent-up energies so that you could come back and sit calmly in class. But what time of day do we put them out in the yard? And how are they being exposed? What about sports? Sport days for schools. So most secondary and primary schools, they have their sport days usually around Easter time. And it's an all-day event in an open field. Should we be modifying the times for this? Or when we schedule things like football games and cricket matches and those types of things, can we look at those types of things and make adjustments? Should we be making adjustments? So in other parts of the world, people have been using AI when we go back to the workplace, and they have been using AI in Taiwan, for example. They created some prototypes of wearable devices that can actually track both the environmental conditions in terms of the ambient temperature, relative humidity, and the wind and solar radiation. And it can also track worker vital statistics. And that can be used to alert the worker if they need to stop, if they need to rest, take a hydration break, avoid the sun, those types of things. There's also an example of a company in Japan that created a cooling material. So when you sweat and the moisture is absorbed in that material, it actually lowers the temperature. So those things are available. It's being marketed. In 2023, I attended the National Safety Council conference, and that was one of the products that was being marketed at that time. So it's out there. It's just a matter of us familiarizing ourselves and incorporating it within our industry. What about AI and exposure to high temperatures and UV radiation? There are some companies that have developed things like smart helmets, vests, and wristbands. And these are outfitted with AI-driven sensors to prevent heat exhaustion. So it's going to monitor the worker's core temperature, their hydration levels, and heart rate. And based on this, it can alert both the worker and the supervisor to prompt hibernation breaks. Some of these, and I am not marketing any particular company, let me say that here, and I should have said this at the beginning. The session speaks about AI and how the role of AI in the workplace, and my presentation today was also augmented by AI. So I had AI software look at my slides and alert me as to where I can improve. So being able to utilize these things to be more effective, more efficient is something that we all can do. It's there for us and we should not fight it. Let's talk about extreme weather events. So we spoke about heat stress, we spoke about UV radiation, and now we're speaking about extreme weather events. This is the third category of impacts associated with climate change. And in our region of the world, we are no strangers to that. We all experience the effects of the North Atlantic hurricane season. And from 1944 to 2020, we have been able to track the times and the days of the year that different extreme weather events take place. And this graphic actually shows us when is our peak hurricane season. The question is, last year, 2024, was forecasted to be a hyperactive hurricane season, and it did not turn out to be as hyperactive and destructive as anticipated. Around February in 2024, the ocean temperature was at the levels, it was so hot that they were saying it was at temperatures that we anticipated in April and May. So that had a lot of scientists very concerned and alarmed. And we actually saw a shift in the actual hurricane season. So some hurricanes actually started a lot earlier than anticipated, and the season persisted longer than we had anticipated. So with climate change and with the warming of the oceans, are we going to see a change in trends with regards to the hurricane season? And how does that change in the hurricane season affect our work? Because the hurricane season brings with it a risk profile for doing certain activities. We try to plan certain maintenance type work outside of the hurricane season, but also in your utility, you need to respond after, as we said in the beginning, post hurricanes and post emergencies to restore service to your populations. And what that means is if there is a flattening out of your hurricane season and it's spread over a longer period of time, or your peak season is rather than a peak, but it spreads out, then the demands on your resources and your utilities to support communities is going to spread out over a longer period of time. So how do you now resource yourself to manage these types of things? Interestingly, from 1851 to 2015, we would have seen, I hope this comes up, changes in when hurricanes take place. And as the screen changes, it's going through, a 2-week period. And you see where the hurricanes are starting. And around July is when we start to see an increase in events taking place off the west coast of Africa. And it peaks in late August into September. and it starts to taper off in October into November. Now, how does this data and this graphic help us in our area? What does this mean for us? What does it mean in terms of the work that you do and the effect on your communities? That's something that is not easy to summarize in a short conversation, but it is something that requires serious effort and thought to strategize how we're going to manage these types of things. We can also use AI to optimize our work schedules, right? We can use AI to analyze weather forecasts and weather data so that we can schedule work and know when we're doing things like pipeline repairs, reservoir inspections. We can use AI to help us schedule work so that the work can be done during cooler periods of the day. And there is an example of a AI-driven solution that already offers this type of service. Air pollution. With climate change, there is going to be an increase in air pollution. There's going to be an increase in energy usage to counteract the increase in temperature, which is an ongoing cycle. So as we use more energy to cool and drive AC units, we are putting out more greenhouse gases, and we are, furthering the whole issue of climate change. But using AI, and some companies have already started doing this, using AI, we can create dynamic scheduling to reduce mileage and fuel efficiency, increase fuel efficiency for vehicles, increase productivity by freeing up staff to focus on other activities. We can change the work pattern to allow recovery time for drivers and reduce our overall vehicular emissions. So this is something that can be done from an environmental point of view. From a health and safety point of view, AI can actually be used to monitor traffic patterns, accident statistics, and to optimize routes to reduce accidents and vehicular collisions. So AI can be used from a safety and an environmental point of view in the transport industry, which will have improvements in the environmental impact as well as health and safety. From an air pollution point of view in your industry, AI can also be used in terms of air and gas sensors, where you can have real-time monitoring in sewer plants, confined spaces to detect hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia. And the AI algorithms can actually predict where leaks can take place, and they can actually trigger or activate ventilation systems, which would reduce worker exposure and improve health and safety within your organization. And there is an example of one of these systems that is also being utilized. For wastewater treatment systems, you can also use AI to monitor chemical levels in the effluent being treated. This reduces the worker having to interact with the wastewater, reducing exposure. It can optimize the application of chemicals, reduce the volume of chemicals that's being used, reduce the cost of the operations, and reduce the need for manual intervention in dangerous environments. We can use AI in flood and disaster preparedness. AI can be used to analyze rainfall patterns, sea level rise, drainage conditions, and this can be used to predict flood areas. So earlier on, I was asking about water scarcity, and this is one of the examples that you can utilize. In a post-disaster scenario, you can have the utilization of drones to inspect damaged facilities, pipelines, reservoirs. You can also utilize autonomous robots, which can also conduct inspections in locations where you do not want to deploy your human resources. Vector-borne diseases, the increase in vector-borne diseases. Now, with climate change, before I speak about this, let me speak about how climate change can actually result in an increase in vector-borne diseases. Many insects, mosquitoes as a good example, they have a particular range of environmental conditions that they can tolerate. So the mosquito population is limited to a certain latitude, longitude, altitude. And that in itself restricts the spread of vector-borne diseases. As climate change unfolds, you're going to see a change in temperatures in different locations, which means that vectors that were initially restricted to the tropics may have a larger area that they can now flourish in terms of latitude and longitude. As temperature changes, even in terms of altitude, as you go higher up elevations, the vectors may be able to thrive in those environments. So what you have is there's a larger percentage of the global population that can be exposed to vectors, and that's going to increase the propagation of vector-borne diseases. So I merged two topics here, waterborne diseases and vector-borne diseases. And AI can be used for both. AI can be used from a contamination detection point of view, using AI to do real-time analysis of samples and detect things like E. coli, cholera, leptospirosis. And if you think about things like cholera in places where there have been mass disasters like major earthquakes and stuff, and you have people occupying shelters, the issue of cholera becomes a big issue. The issue of leptospirosis becomes a big issue. And being able to manage that is something that you need to be able to deal with. And you hear WHO talking about things like cholera outbreaks and trying to manage that. Now we can actually detect it earlier on with the use of AI. AI can also be used in terms of outbreak prediction, right? In terms of analyzing climate patterns, looking at things like temperature changes, humidity, rainfall. And by analyzing the climate patterns, we can predict outbreaks of things like malaria and dengue, right? So we can use that information and having knowledge about the behaviors and capabilities of vectors, like the distance a mosquito can fly before it needs a blood meal. If we were to utilize GIS and AI, we can actually identify where the breeding sites are, where the nearest agriculture station is where they can have blood meals, or where the nearest human population is where they can have blood meals, and we can determine the risk associated with particular breeding sites. And we can manage the potential for outbreaks more effectively. We can target the use of our resources where it will have the greatest impact in reducing the spread of these diseases. So we always talk about the triple bottom line, and I'm almost at the end of the session here. But in talking about the triple bottom line, now we have to ask ourselves, how does climate change and AI affect our triple bottom line? How does it affect our planet? How does it affect our people and our profitability? So as someone who started his career as an environmentalist, I must include this slide. The best time for you to have planted a tree would have been 20 years ago. And the next best time is today, because we need to protect our environment. We need to balance progress with environmental management, and there's no getting away from that. So the new topic for discussion is, how can climate change and AI affect your operations? And I hope that when we conclude this session that, I would have been able to share some information with you that will allow you to further this conversation, and hopefully some improvements can be made in the industry. So with that, thank you very much. I will open the session for any questions.
Hi, afternoon, Mr. Kandhai. How you doing, Valley here?
How are you doing?
Doing well. Great discussion. I saw your name. I was really saying, Mr. Kandhai, in our niche. That's really good. Great topic, great discussion. Concerning our environment as far as AI, I know it will be a capital injection, and much more so in the regional and governmental sphere. It'll take a lot of it might take legislation and some twisting of arms, so to speak, to make that happen. What strike me the most as far as with the climate, you're talking about the eye damage, with the UV, with the radiation, and also the exposure to your skin. How would that affect as far as standards in safety wear? Seeing that in certain plants, they only want clear lens. I know they have like UV coated and that kind of thing. So how would that affect that going forward? And also with they having certain standards for coveralls and flame retardant clothing. How would that with that particular material that you saw in National Safety Council gathering that you saw, how could the industry incorporate that into managing the risks of exposure to heat and stuff?
Excellent question, Duane, and your question actually spanned several of my slides, so I know you was paying attention, so thanks. The approach to that is a risk management approach, and you really have to like and love the science behind it. So we have to use the science and a risk-based approach to our decision making. What that means is we have to balance up the risk of having a clear lens versus a UV protective lens within the particular environment. So if in a particular plant, the risk of not seeing a leak or not seeing something because you have tinted lens can result in a catastrophic failure on your facility, then we have to balance that up with the risk to the employee. Now, you can manage the risk to the employee by minimizing the exposure. So some of the slides, that's where I spoke about using AI to really allow scheduling of work during certain times of the day when the risk is lower. So, and a lot of this with respect to climate change and UV is not new. This has been around more than 20 years. People have been speaking about these things. And there have been, guidance about avoiding being out in direct sun between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and those types of things. So trying to schedule your inspections and your visits to minimize that. Or if people do have to be out there, they should not be out there for 2 or 3 hours on a go, but they should be able to give their eyes a rest and those types of things. So it's not a one exposure and your eyes will be damaged, but it's over a period of time and you can mitigate it by managing the exposure.
Right.
Sorry, there was a question about the materials for PPE. And again, that has to be based on a risk-based approach. That PPE or that new material may be suitable in certain environments or certain industries, but it may not be necessarily suitable in an industrial plant type setting. Okay.
I see Mr. Misol, Silas has a Silas Misol, you have your hand up. Go ahead. It's your question.
Yes, good day. A wonderful presentation. Of course, so much information. I especially like the idea that you spoke to climate change and the risk associated. However, for our small island developing states, we lack sufficient information in monitoring, the trends to really guide our approach. And I was listening to some university professors at UWI who state that, looking at climate change versus climate variability, we cannot be certain, especially for our small islands, that what is happening did not happen in the past or years before. But I do get the idea that planning, because what we have currently, trends are showing that it might get worse. But looking at the world and our islands, I'm asking, is there also that possibility that things might get better in the future as well?
So that's a very good point. And you know, that's why one of the slides I spoke about the general consensus within the scientific community. So people who spend their entire professional career studying this thing, the academics, and you know, in the high 90s, 97% of the scientific community who've studied this all agree that climate change is, as a result, significantly to human activity and development. So I would not, you know, assume that I can say more about that than people who have, you know, dedicated their academic careers to that. Having said that, yes, there will be variability, and studying earth sciences, it's not, you know, exact. When we think about time frames, you know, that is something that affects our decision making. So the time frame of the average human, you know, depending on which part of the world you're from, you know, in my country, some people say we have a 10-day mentality. After 10 days, we forget. But a person might be remembering within their lifetime, right? So let's say 40 years might be your time frame. For some indigenous cultures where there's an oral tradition of passing down stories, their timeline and perspective of changes in the environment might be, you know, a couple generations worth of years. But on a geological scale, the time frame is millennia. And to wrap our minds around that, it takes a lot. What I do believe, however, is with the use of AI, we will be able to better understand and focus our decision making based on that. Because some of the things and the volume of information we may not be able to really conceptualize or understand, but we can use AI to assist with that.
Mr. Kandhai, you mentioned, of course, following up on your AI proposals and the areas where I think it's already been used in many systems in other places in helping us to solve problems. How, with your knowledge of the state of things in the region, what do you think it would be some of the platforms or the basic things you would need to have in place so that you can apply AI to the systems?
That is a very good question. So I think for AI to be effective, it has to be based on data. So we have to have the monitoring systems to provide us with the data that we can feed into the AI. So I can speak about in Trinidad, our Water and Sewage Authority. They recently announced an integrated command center for monitoring networks and stuff. Whether it's fully operational or not, I cannot speak to that. But the potential of that integrated command center to provide the type of data that AI can use to then allow for efficiency is important. So I would say for our types of economies in our region, we need to be investing in the infrastructure so that we can do the monitoring to feed the information into the AI.
Yeah, I think that's where yeah, I think quite a few of during the CWWA conference in Trinidad last year, I think quite a few of the delegations were taken to visit the command center because as many of our smaller utilities are still trying to fit all of the, try to put in the new infrastructure to be able to capture a lot of the data. So that is critical, really. Any questions again that you have for Mr. Kandhai? I'm not seeing any others on the floor.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, good, Timothy. Yes.
Yes, sir. I'm a professional operator out of Trinidad and Tobago, Augustus here. I want to thank you for the presentation. I'm just having a different swing on the use of AI and so on in the monitoring of climate change and so on. Can we use this type of information to push for water conservation wastewater recycling and reuse and other methods to, to swing or persuade the government in the region to have a better look at this in terms of, with climate change and change in weather patterns and so on? Can we use AI as well to push for this kind of outlook?
I would say AI can be the applications of AI is limitless. What I think we need in our region really is, you hear people talk about there being these global think tanks. I think we need something like that for our region where we sit and we look at the region collectively, we put our heads together and we start to do some future scanning for the region. And in doing the future scanning for our region, we would then identify where we need to become more resilient and what are the things we need to have in place to be resilient so that we can face the future that's coming at us. And inside of all of that, that's where AI can become a tool that we can utilize so that as a region, we can survive what comes next.
Mr. Roger Karim has had his hand up. Please proceed.
All right. Yeah. Good evening. Thanks, John. First of all, Rajesh, thank you so much. I think it was a really fantastic, interesting presentation. Two comments, really. One, the first one, I think it was Dern who raised the question about PPE and UV. I just wanted to share that we were having the same discussion. It was actually about welder's jacket, because the welder's jacket, is a much thicker jacket. And they were complaining about heat, because as we realize, the place is getting hotter, right? And the welders are complaining that when they wear this welding jacket, especially in more restricted spaces, they get hot. And we were actually assessing whether we should switch to the Nomex, because the Nomex is a little more breathable. It has a certain level of flash fire protection. And therefore, that is something that we are actually looking at whether we should change our PP requirements for welders to now using Nomex instead rather than the traditional welder's jacket. So that's one. Two, the Rajesh raised the issue about WASA's operating center. And yes, you're quite correct. The idea is, but the thing with AI, you need a lot of data, because it's really and truly allowing you to process data many different ways that you ordinarily would not be able to do. So what we've been trying to do is build that data platform. So collecting data in terms of the network pressures, flows, tied back to customers, so like who are our customers, how much storage they have, how many people in the homes, those sort of things. So that allows us to make a lot of better decision making in terms of simple thing, travel distance, scheduling, how we deliver truck-borne water. If we know how long the supply is going to be out for, and what people have in terms of the storage on site, do we need to really send a truck-borne supply there? So it's a lot of potential for how you use AI, essentially in optimizing the way you do operation, which leads to efficiency, which leads to less energy cost and savings. So it is interesting. To add to that, I think I was in Carricoff, I think in Jamaica, not last year before. And I think there was a project in St. Lucia where they were collecting data on the watersheds in terms of rainfall, sediment loading. And I think they were trying to determine that based on the amount of rainfall, like in terms of inches of rainfall or millimeters of rainfall, how much sediment loading will arise. And therefore, they use that of decision making in terms of how long they will keep the intake so the facility is running. So again, you could see there is some natural progression now in using information and the AI to make better decisions. Yeah, so that's just my contribution.
Thank you, Roger. Dwayne, you had another question. I see your hand raised, so is that an old hand?
Yes, yeah. One other question from Mr. Kandhai.
Okay.
You spoke about AI and using less manpower to operate and maintain and to mitigate the equipment and utilities, and with that will come loss of jobs and how, and every other thing that will come in as far as the human resource, how would you persuade? And again, I won't see how it will mitigate. And with in other sectors, with other changes, you will have some downsizing. How would that affect the utility sector in that regard? Again, you have to be trained, you have constant training, that kind of thing. How is there any other way you could have that without having that mass, I should say, that a mass effect?
Right. That's a good point, and a lot of people have that concern. Now, with optimization and efficiency, that in itself will have any effort to become more efficient will reduce the resources you require. So we have to start with that mindset. However, I have seen several instances where the use of things like robotics and automation, where people would have thought initially that it could result in loss of jobs, it actually creates an opportunity for upskilling, because you still will always need a human supervision of the AI and the execution of the activities. The resources, the human skills that you need will become more specialized, however. So it's either of two things. Either the persons who are in the industry need to adapt and evolve and upskill to be able to function in this new environment, or there will become opportunities for others who can fill that technology gap. So your total manpower may not necessarily have to change or decrease. And there have been a couple examples of that. I can tell you that in the Ferrero Rocher factory in Italy, the introduction of automated scanning of and automation for a lot of their processes did not result in a decrease in staffing. It resulted in a change in the skills of the staff to supervise the activities. So there are several examples of that, but that's the one that came to mind just now. So I don't think that it is something to be overly concerned about, but it is something to keep your eye on and to keep discussing. And really, it's about sensitizing the workforce to being able to adapt. Just like how we have to adapt and mitigate against climate change, we have to adapt. This is coming. AI is going, it is a reality. I didn't talk about the use of virtual and augmented reality in our business as well. But I can tell you that in 2004, I think, I attended a conference in London, and at that conference, 2004, they were showing us the use of smart safety glasses, where it's military technology. It was military technology at the time, but your safety glasses had a screen in it that you can see the SOPs. And that you, as an operator, when you go out into the plant, you have a patch that's attached to your hand and you can scan a barcode on a valve. And immediately within your safety glasses, you start seeing the SOP. So these things have been around. Whether it took root is debatable, but the opportunities are there. We just have to, be willing to change with the times and stay abreast of what's happening.
Yeah, I see Valerie. Welcome.
I was just going to say, Rajesh, that depends on whether the utility actually has SOPs.
True.
That is something that at Operators Without Borders, we are making available to all utilities. We have a set of 225, so I'll just get a plug in for that. If anybody is looking for more SOPs, we have them. They're free of charge, and we have a committee that can work with you on getting you what you need.
Well, I see that I don't see another hand up, but we had a few comments. I think Karen Martinez says, I think it would be a good start to start using AI to help with scheduling maintenance. I think Rajesh already spoke about that, and Anderson Bowen also had a similar comment about having the technology basin or the region have to get into the culture of utilizing the technologies and to help with mitigation of risk, such as HR concerns and cyber breaches. So yes, I don't know if you have any other questions, comments, colleagues. I'd like to thank Rajesh for taking time to be with us this afternoon and sharing his immense knowledge and experiences with on climate change first, and showing the integration with using the smart systems to help with mitigation and adaptation to the issues of climate change, and of course how they impact the work environment and our health generally in the workplace. So we thank you so much for that presentation. And of course, it's been recorded. It will be shared with other colleagues who may have missed. I think we had a pretty good turnout this afternoon. And I'm Ignatius Jean, the Executive Director at CAWASA, Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, based in St. Lucia. But this afternoon, I'm hosting the conference out of Barbados, out of the Hilton in Barbados at the CDMA, on the fringes of the CDMA conference. So thank you very much. Have a good evening.
So
Thank you again.
Ignatius, I don't think there's there was a reason I think we didn't book one for next week. You may have addressed that earlier. I was a little bit late today.